Okay, we are recording. I am Brandon Polite, professor of philosophy at Knox College in Galesburg, Illinois, and I'm joined by Cynthia Freeland, who is professor emerita of philosophy at the University of Houston. Cynthia, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. So, before we get into the thing we're going to be talking about momentarily, I just want to say that, you're someone who's written prolifically in aesthetics with respect to a wide range of issues from horror films, film in general, perfume, etc. And the question of what is art, as you talk about in your terrific book, But Is It Art, from 2001, Oxford University Press, which I think is part now of the Very Short Introductions series, and further has been translated into, I think, 18 languages now?
I think so. Mm-hmm.
That's absolutely phenomenal and well deserved because it's a fantastic book. And so, shifting then to what we're talking about now, recently, you've gotten really into K-dramas, right? Korean dramas. And you've been thinking about them philosophically. And so for people who may not be familiar with K-dramas, myself included, I really haven't watched any. I've seen a bunch of Korean films, but never television. Can you just talk us through what are some of the key characteristics of that genre?
Well, thank you. K-dramas are TV dramas, so they're just different from films, and that's important for some issues we'll come to later. In a big way, they're different from most Anglo-American dramas, is that they're generally just one season. And that's makes a huge difference in what they're like. So they're known and they're world famous and extremely popular everywhere for a lot of features, including terrific plots, very high production values. They get government funding, and also fantastically intricate plotting and plot reversals. A variety of types of stories. So you have, science fiction, historical epics, fairy tale, folk and fairy tales, rom-coms, and just a really wide variety of stories. And Korea itself is a beautiful country, highly varied in scenery, has 4 seasons. And so you can have fantastic scenes that are set in skiing places or little fishing villages or huge modern metropolises like Seoul or Busan, beaches, fall scenes, summer scenes, lots of rainy scenes. And so there's just a huge variety. But I think because there's only one season usually, there's not an expectation that you're going to continue the story or that success involves having renewal. Instead, the success involves, getting audience viewership. So typically they run on Korean TV 2 nights in a row, and so they'll have 2 episodes, and they sort of fall into a kind of development episode and then a plot complication episode with a cliffhanger, so it keeps you coming back. And they often have 16 episodes, 24. There's a few with 50 or 70 episodes, but there's one story arc. There may be multiple characters and there's multiple twists, but there's one story, and so you can follow the story arc through. And the K-drama writers are themselves pretty famous, and a lot of them are women. And so I think they're known and they're followed. And so some of the K-drama writers are so good that the actors want to get into one of their dramas. And so there's that makes, the treasuring of the writers is something that I think is quite important. And there's other things that I think we'll come to later, but one of the key things is the intensity of romance plots. So they're very long and drawn out, and they're often very troubled, but they're almost always a happy ending. Not always, there are a few tragedies, but so that's one of the things that makes them so popular. They're popular all over Asia, India, Philippines, European countries, South America, U.S., and they just have a kind of a range of stories. I first got into them because I was looking for police cop dramas, because I like murder mysteries and things, and I ran out of other things on Netflix, so I thought, I'll try a Korean one, and I thought, wow, this is really good. Let me watch another one, and that was 3 years ago.
Let's talk through the wide range, as you pointed to, of Korean dramas.
This is from my favorite show, which I confess I've watched 6 times. Repeat watching is another characteristic of K-drama fans, and it's called Mr. Sunshine, and it's a historical drama, but it's not medieval or feudal history. It's set in the 1890s, so it's on the cusp of the Japanese occupying Korea, and it's just a very beautifully filmed drama with the extremely gorgeous sets and scenes. And so I've got a few scenes from it, I think. This is also from that same drama, and I just selected it to show how there's this beautiful scenery, and also there are many historical palaces that remain in different parts of Korea, especially in Seoul, which are traces of the Joseon dynasty, which was from the sort of 1300s to 1897. And so you get a lot of these vistas like this, and a kind of romantic couple posed against a beautiful sunset vista. And you get a lot of palace scenes too. So this is from a different genre, which is, it looks historical and it is set in a historical time period, but this is a fantasy and fairy tale. There's a lot of folk tales in Korea that date back, centuries and centuries, and this is called The Nine-Tailed Fox, and it's a story in which, it's so complicated, but there's these fox gods in the mountains, and the fox god is looking for the woman he loved, and he's looking for her to be reincarnated because he committed a sin by falling in love with a mortal woman, and she's being carried along into some, future world. Now, here's some modern examples. In the city of Seoul, there's a lot of really striking architecture, and so you can have scenes that are like this, that involve this very striking scenes of, this is a corporate drama. There's lots of dramas about corporate corruption and corporate power struggles. And the families are called chaebols, Chaebol, chaebols, and they're the big conglomerate owners, and they run their companies like these feudal states with lots of conniving and scheming and even murdering, and mistresses and illegitimate children vying for power. And so this is just an example of one of those shows. This is from the show Vincenzo. It's a show I recommend, except it has extreme violence, which is not generally true, but it's kind of a complicated show, and it's just showing some of what you see is the sort of scenes of guys going out drinking together in this kind of incredible-looking bar restaurant. Another scene from Vincenzo, just showing it's kind of the beauty of the cinematography, the setting in Seoul. Another one, it's the same film, Vincenzo. And Seoul is a sort of San Francisco kind of city, mountainous. It doesn't have the ocean there, but there's this big river and lots of bridges. And so there's many scenes that involve meeting on bridges or under bridges, or trains and buses going over the bridges. And they make beautiful use of the natural setting of the city. Just another example of kind of camera work and the kind of beauty of the construction of images. That's from another of my favorite shows called Devil Judge. Another show, this is a guy who's involved in a gambling organization, a sort of crime group. And so just the kind of stunning scenery you got. This is believe it or not, it's a courthouse. It's in that show Devil Judge, and it's just the way the scenes are shot in that show. They're just, you kind of just drop your jaw at how gorgeous scenes are, and then of course somebody may pop their head over, or maybe they'll get pushed over the edge of one of these balconies. You never really know. Okay, that's the exterior of that same building, which is used, I have no idea what it really is, but it's used in Devil Judge as this big courthouse building. Another one that's back to it's kind of a combination of science fiction, folk tale, and this is called King the Eternal Monarch. And there are a lot of K-dramas that have time travel. I neglected to mention that as a subgenre. This is not exactly, there is time travel in it, but it's also a travel between contemporary worlds. And the king is in a contemporary world that's a parallel to modern Korea, but his version of Korea is still a monarchy, and he's the monarch. But the woman he loves is in the other Korea, the real Korea. So he has to cross through these pillars of time, and it's just kind of beautiful the way it's depicted in the film, in the show.
I mean, you're pointing to just the wide range of Korean dramas, and crossing all of these genres, subgenres, and the images that you selected to show and talk through are really striking. They're very cinematic, and they seem to have a much higher production value than a typical show in, say, the United States.
Oh, they're beautifully filmed, and especially the historical epics. That's a very big, important subgenre, and they call them sagyuks, and they go all out. I mean, it's literally casts of thousands, and the women in the royal palaces are all wearing these gorgeous dresses, the traditional hanbok, and they're brilliant colors, and they're strolling around these lovely palace grounds, and there's ponds and flowers, and so those are, and also a lot of the historical epics have battles, and they have sword fighting scenes. So if people like that kind of martial arts stuff, they're really over the top scenes, and they have armor and horses, and they're very, very strong. And the odd thing is that I mentioned government funding. So K-dramas are subject to censorship. And Korea has really strict gun laws. So most of the gang violence that you'll see, or other kinds of violence, murders, they don't use guns. And so that means the violent scenes are kind of more interesting, because in a way, guns, you just shoot each other and it's done. Whereas if I'm fighting with knives or there's lead pipes, it can be very extended and kind of more dramatic. But an odd thing about Korean censorship is that usually if you watch a K-drama, knives are blurred. So if somebody's attacking with a knife, it gets blurred. But then on the other hand, you have all these medieval epics, and they're piercing each other with swords. So it just kind of doesn't make sense. But the sword fighting, I'm not that big a fan of it, but I can tell that it's quite well done. It's beautifully choreographed, and horses and everything, and very agonizing death. It's kind of Homeric.
That's super interesting, right? And I mean, one thing there to note is you point out they're government subsidized, right? That there's a lot of government funding, and the rise of K-dramas internationally in the past decade or so, maybe less, right, is part of what's known more broadly as like the K-wave, the Korean wave, where it's not merely K-dramas, but Korean cinema, Korean music like K-pop, right, BTS, etc., right? They're all government subsidized, and it's part of like this broader push within Korean culture of it's a form of soft diplomacy, right? Of sort of getting people interested in Korean culture, not merely to like promote tourism, but to promote like Korean values and Korea's role internationally.
Yes, it's a bit of a scandal about the K-dramas. Not quite so true anymore, but if you watch older ones, product placement is very big, and you can kind of count products you'll see in the K-dramas, and so there'll be, all one kind of car, or there's a scene where the rich women go in a department store and they're all buying one kind of makeup, and there's a joke about there's a candy, a kind of, I've never had it, but it's Corico is what it's named. And it comes in little squares, looks like a chocolate bar, but it's apparently got caffeine. It's like an energy bar, and I swear that is in every single K drama. And so there's a little too much product placement. I do think that's tending down, but yes, there's and certain kind of cars will be featured and things like that. But yeah, that's a big factor, and it has something to do with the way that romance is depicted too, which I know we're going to get to.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, right? You mentioned censorship, and it's interesting that, contemporary knife fights, we have to blur the knives, whereas historical dramas, like, they were fighting with swords back then, so we can show that uncensored.
And nobody's going to go out and kill people today with a sword, or not very many, right? Yes. Well, K-dramas are really known for the intense romances, and that's one of the things that is very different in between K-dramas and Western dramas that we're more familiar with. So the dramas almost always have romances. Even if it's like a cop drama, there's often a romance. Not always, but very often. And the historical dramas always have one. And they build and build and build. And there's lots of plot devices that keep the two potential lovers apart, even when it's clear they're destined for each other. But there's so much pent-up desire and emotion that it gets expressed in different ways, because actual any kind of simulation of sex is not allowed. And so there's even if people end up going to bed together, the joke is they're almost always in their clothes, and you just see their heads, or you may see a shoulder, a bare shoulder. Is like, ooh, And there's a joke that you don't get to have a kiss you can't have a kiss until episode 13.
Yeah, you get lucky on unlucky 13, right? And it's it's interesting too, precisely because, as you pointed out earlier, most series run only 16 episodes, and so it's episode 13 that you get the kiss, and so there's very much like the trope in at least American television, I think British television too, especially 80s, 90s, of the will they, won't they, right? You get that in Moonlighting, you get it in Cheers, you get it in the X-Files, et cetera, right? The will they, won't they, will they, won't they, and most recently, I think famously in the Office, right? With the American Office with Jim and Pam, right? The UK Office is interesting because it functions more similarly to a K-drama in that Tim and Dawn, there we go, right? Like, they don't actually kiss until the very end of the series. And then there's like no follow-up, right? Whereas, at the American Office, Jim and Pam like get together multiple seasons in, but then there's series where it explores their relationship. There's the wedding and the consequences of that. Whereas with K-dramas, it seems you get this really short window, right? Episode 13 of 16 is the kiss. And then what then happens in the remaining 3 episodes before it ends?
Usually
typically?
there's another disaster and they get torn apart again. So they kiss once, and then you have to keep waiting and waiting until the very final episode. So it really keeps you on tenterhooks. Or else there are these tropes of romantic K-dramas, and people have lists of them. I mean, I've got my own list of them. And so one of the big tropes is the white panel truck. So there's an amazing number of people that get hit, pedestrians on crosswalks get hit by a white panel truck. And it's a joke. It's like, do hitmen in Korea hire murders to be done by the white panel truck? And watch out, there's a white panel truck. And so it sometimes is an intentional thing or an accidental thing. The long separated lovers are getting reunited. They see each other across a busy street. You know what's going to happen. They go running. Runs through the intersection, bam, and they get knocked out. And then will they live? You know. And another trope. It's really ridiculous. Is there's an amnesia trope. So the one of the two lovers has some hereditary disease, and all of a sudden it gets expressed, and they faint, and they go to the hospital, and then they have amnesia, and so they don't remember the other person. And so there's a variety of those kinds of things. They keep your interest, and so, but the family dynamics are a very big thing because there's a lot of class issues that are expressed in K-dramas. And so the very typical dynamic is that you have this Shebol family, and there's a lot of arranged marriages in K-dramas. And so the key thing is, can the people, survive an arranged marriage? Will they actually find a person they truly love in the arranged marriage? Is it hopeless? That's why there's mistresses who are like the feudal concubines of kings. So there's a lot of dramas around that, and it's almost always the rich son and a poor young man who's sort of virtuous and hardworking, but he has to earn his way into the family and the family's love and respect. So that's the version I said it the wrong way. Rich guy and a poor young woman, but she's very virtuous and earnest and true and good. But a few times it's reversed. So Queen of Tears, it's the reverse scenario. It's a very rich, horrible Shebol daughter who's running the company, and then the poor young guy. I mean, he's happy. He's a lawyer. He's not a dummy, but he doesn't count in terms of the levels of wealth that are required. And so you get a lot of tension over things like that.
Yeah, so let's talk more about the way romance gets expressed, and in particular, like the delay and the buildup to the kiss, right?
So because K-dramas, you don't generally have a consummatory sex scene. The big consummation of a romance in a K-drama is the kiss. And even if there's a kiss earlier on, like the episode 13 kiss isn't the good kiss. you almost have to wait until the end. And the kiss is sort of so overemphasized that it's very strange. It's very strange to watch as a Western audience member. I'm used to it now, but the way kisses happen, I've got them classed into two forms. And so let's talk about them. One form is a comical kind of kiss. So you can change the picture now. And this is a good example from Vincenzo. And the Korean fans call it the dead fish eye kiss. And this is where one person kisses another person and takes them by surprise. And they react by this expression. They don't kiss back. They just get these big bug eyes. And I think I've got another example that shows some of these kisses. And so here it's the guy kissing the girl. And she's got that look on her face. And I think I've got a couple more too. So this is a case where the young woman kisses her boyfriend, and he does the bug-eyed kiss, and then he looks at her, and then he grins. So it takes him a while to process it. But it's quite. This is a very commonly seen scene, and the other kind of kiss is the what I call the magical kiss. And so the very end of Vincenzo, which is, I think, 24 episodes, and it's very, very long delayed, we get this scene, and I can't really explain how it's so complicated, but the lovers finally are meeting up after a separation, and we get the big kiss. And it's filmed, keep going, yeah, it's filmed in this way where in all these magical kisses are filmed where you see it in close-up from 10 angles and the camera swirls around and you get these duplicative things like you have here, and it's just like, whoa, that's really a kiss. And so it's really kind of a better than sex scene thing. So the funny thing is, that at first these kiss scenes were just ludicrous to me. I literally giggled, and the sex scenes with the people in bed in their clothes and the lights are on too. They never turn the light. And at first it made me giggle, but then when I watched enough K-dramas, and I went back and watched Bridgerton season 3, which was last year, I just found myself shocked. I thought, what are they doing? Why? That's too fast. Stop. Oh, gross. So you get mentally changed, and the pacing just seems ridiculous. Like these two people, why are they taking their clothes off? They haven't had any real conversations. They don't know each other. They don't understand each other. The good thing about the K-drama romances is that the people really talk. They spend time, they interact, they pay attention to one another's moods and emotions, and it just makes quite a difference. And the pacing is something that you can't follow in the beginning. When you first start watching K-dramas, you think, God, they're so slow. Why aren't they doing anything? Why aren't they talking? And another drama that I really liked was The Diplomat with Rufus Sewell and Kerry Russell. Was out a few years ago, and I love both of those actors. They're great, and it was so clever and witty. And they recently did season 2, and I couldn't stand to watch it. And I think they're both fabulous actors, but when they're just like this witty back and forth, and I felt like these were actors saying lines. They weren't people talking. It really had a huge impact on me, and I was sort of sad because I just couldn't enjoy it anymore. They're great. It's a fun show, but it seems silly to me.
And was that in part just because you've sort of become conditioned or habituated more to the K-drama pacing and style?
Yes, it just seems as though there's just more personal development and deeper characterization. And once you've sort of started to see that, what you see in a show like Bridgerton is just kind of stupid. I thought in the beginning, the first 2 seasons I was entertained by. I wasn't ever like a huge fan, but anyway. So now it just, ugh.
Yeah, and it's what's interesting there is, it's precisely like anyone now who's, used to contemporary Western American films, right, who goes back and watches a bunch of old films, right, is going to find just the pacing and the constant cutting, right, all of these shots being stitched together. It's just going to come across as like, why can't the directors, filmmakers just like let a scene unfold, let the actors act instead of constantly cutting from one shot to another shot to another shot to another shot. And it makes it much harder to watch contemporary cinema, I find.
Real people don't talk in that kind of dialogue. It's very clever, the dialogue in The Diplomat. And the two people deliver their lines very well, but you just think like, no, why don't they talk?
And that seems to be an issue of writing as well, right? Where it's like the writer, you're seeing like the writer and the actors are saying the lines of the writer, but like so it seems like this is interesting, right? That with K-dramas, like the writers gain fame and acclaim and people follow one series to another series because, it's by the same writer. But it seems like the writer's sort of at least hidden within the dialogue, right? It's you, as you're describing it, you're focusing on the characters and they seem to have these genuine human interactions. Whereas, in American series, British series, the writers are usually anonymous, right? Or at least they're not acclaimed in the way that by the general audience, right? But like the writer is just much more apparent at the surface of dialogue.
Yes, and the writers change all the time. I mean, you don't have one show written by one writer. And generally, the K-dramas is one writer, one director, one cinematographer. American, Anglo-American dramas tend to have a variety of writers and directors. I mean, even a really good show, like I used to watch Law and Order Criminal Intent, the one with Vincent D'Onofrio, which I thought was by far the best of all those series. And even that show, I think, had different directors and different writers for different episodes, whereas a K-drama typically has one writer, one director, one cinematographer, and it gives you a consistent aesthetic vision all the way through, and it ends up being a more crafted sort of work, and you can see that in the way that it works, the way it's carried out.
Yeah, awesome. So let's talk about some more characteristic qualities of K-dramas. So I
think another factor in this is something I've read. I'm not an expert on Korean culture. I'm not a historian. I don't speak Korean. So I'm talking about Korean culture as seen in K-dramas, right? That's a big difference. But one factor that has some impact on the timing and what seems at first slow pacing is something I've read about in Korean life called Nunchi. And the literal translation is I measure. And it has to do with people perceiving one another's emotions by just gauging them and looking carefully at them. And so you'll have a lot of scenes in K-dramas where these are the scenes where you think, what's happening? Why are they standing there? So these are the two lovers in my favorite show, Mr. Sunshine. And this is the one in the 1890s. And long story, but he's a Korean born child who moved to America, grew up there, came back, he's in the army, and she's a very high, noble lady, and they've fallen in love. There's a lot of class barriers, so they aren't supposed to be together, but they often interact like this. And the scene will just sort of stay there, and then you will see close-ups of their faces, but it sets up this relationship that's a relationship of this kind of observation. And we have another two images from the same show. And this lady is a beautiful woman who's a widow, and she's running a big hotel in the city where the show takes place. And she's sort of envious of the noblewoman because she likes the military guy, and she's always observing them. And so we get a lot of images, and she's just sort of seeing him come in and up the stairs, so she's keeping tabs on him. And another one from the same show, this Nunchi, another of these sort of static scenes, but look how it's set up. You've got this triangular relationship. These three men all are in love with the same woman, the beautiful noble woman. And the one in the center, he's a very rich, noble guy, and he's been engaged to the noble women since they were children, but they don't really like each other. Well, she doesn't like him. He loves her. And then we have the military man, and then we have the samurai, who's a Korean guy who went off to Japan and became a sort of Yakuza boss. So they're all in love with the same woman, and they're assessing one another. They're all visiting the hotel, and they encounter each other, and you have this long extended scene where the laundry's hanging in the hotel yard, and the camera keeps showing them positioned against one another, looking at each other. And there is a little bit of dialogue, but what's more important is the positioning, and the camera does move amongst the three, but this is just a perfect rendering of the ongoing rivalry in the show. It's part of what makes this show so fabulous. One observation is that my friend Rachel Zuckert, who's also in aesthetics, mentioned is that if you watch the historical shows, the sagyuks, the king usually is very powerful, and he can literally get you killed, beheaded, or poisoned at any minute. And there's an array of ministers who offer him advice. And the ministers are always rivals for power with one another. And when they're advising the king is sitting there thinking, and all these ministers are looking at one another, watching. And so there may be this kind of, this again is pure speculation. I'm not a Korean cultural expert, but there seems to be in the dramas this kind of trend from the historical feudal period to contemporary period, where in social life, people are always paying attention to the boss, especially, and what's the boss. So if the boss comes storming out of his inner office, all the workers in their little cubicles are staring, and they're looking at each other. Oh no, what's wrong? What's going to happen next? And so you get a lot of scenes like that, people paying attention to one another. Or if someone's just emotionally in a foul mood, the coworkers are attending to it, and somebody might come over and bring them a cup of tea or something like that. So you get a lot of that kind of careful emotional perception.
Yeah. And so there's just going to be a lot more like listening, paying attention, whereas you pointed out earlier with a lot of like Anglo-American dramas, it's much more just like dialogue delivery, right? Like my witty line followed by your witty line, and it's sort of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and not much like carefully listening, absorbing, attending, reflecting, and then reacting.
Yeah, and the K-drama fans talk about this by praising an actor for these things I didn't quite understand in the beginning. They praise an actor for eye acting. And I think that's really related, because that's like the woman in the hotel scene where she's looking off to the side, and you'll often have close-ups. Somebody's talking, and you'll have another actor who's not saying anything, but his facial expressions will go through about 5 different things. And they call it micro expressions and eye acting. So the top actors are often praised for, oh, his eye acting is so good in this role.
That's absolutely fascinating. So what are some other qualities of
okay, another quality is called Skinshipping. And I learned about this one from another person in aesthetics, another K-drama fan named Angela Sun. And Skinshipping is this kind as a gentle touching. And so this is one way to get around the problem of not showing sex or censoring anything that's really sort of simulated sex. You have gentle touching, and skinship is often something that reflects the attitudes a mother has toward her child. So it's this gentle touching, maybe a little bit of a patting, like you'd pat a baby on the back, very gentle. And so these are scenes in which, this is from Tale of the Nine-Tailed Fox, the man is touching the woman's face. You have this gentle touching of the face, and she's touching his. So this is before there's a kiss, and it's just a sort of sweetness. And you can go to the next image. It's often shown between brothers. So this is the fox with his brother who's very ill, and tending toward him. And I think I have a few more of these sort of brother scenes. And that's the same pair of brothers. This is a different pair of brothers. And what I like about this particular scene is the younger brother who's in a wheelchair. His older brother is comforting him over something, and then so first they show the hand on his younger brother's shoulder, and then they say the younger brother show him putting his head on his hand on his brother's hand, and so it's one of these intimate scenes, and they're in a very difficult personal situation, and so they're helping one another through it by this kind of touching. So it isn't always sexual. Sometimes it can occur between friends and brothers. And this isn't quite skinship, but it's getting close to it. This is two people involved in an incipient romance, and they attend a funeral where it's traditional to pick a white chrysanthemum out of a vase and lay it on the altar. And he hands her one, and she takes it. And if you get this close-up of the hands, and it's like almost touching, and this is showing how the relationship is developing. It may not seem like it. Again, from Mr. Sunshine. This is a highly erotic scene, although you might not know it, where the samurai has come into this local drugstore, and he ran into the noble lady and knocked stuff down, and he bends down to pick stuff up, and then he reaches out and touches her dress. and she tries to pull away, and he won't let go, and he just stares up at her, and there's this like incredible ferocity, sexual ferocity in his eyes. So she's almost crying because she's frightened. She doesn't like him, but there's just this kind of eroticism that gets refined to these levels of tiny detail in scenes like this. And now I think we get the bandaging scenes. Okay, so another way you push skinship into something that's a little more erotic this is from Devil Judge, and she's a cop, and they've been friends since childhood. They're kind of in love with each other, and he's been injured in his job. He's an attorney, prosecutor, and she bandages him. And this is another trope of K-dramas, is there's almost always a bandaging scene. And it doesn't always involve, but sometimes involves, well, if it's the man, taking off his shirt. So you get this portrayal that makes it advance toward intimacy, and then actually he does kiss her after this. But very often in these shows, it's just a Band-Aid. But the Band-Aid is put on with that same kind of erotic attention. So the show I'm watching now, which is very good, called Fated to Love You, there's two rivals for the same woman, and she happens to cut herself in her art studio, and so the boyfriend artist puts a Band-Aid on her, and then she goes home and sees this other man, and he immediately sees this Band-Aid. He says, "What's with that ridiculous Band-Aid?" And he runs off. Gets another Band-Aid and comes and tears off her Band-Aid and puts his own on. And I had to laugh because I've been thinking about these issues, and it was so clearly symbolic. Like, no man is going to put a Band-Aid on my woman. It cracked me up. It was so funny. Okay, so I think I have another. This poor man, this is the same guy in Devil Judge, the young prosecutor. He's been injured another time, and he's working with the senior prosecutor who's actually become a judge. And they're both in danger for a complicated reason. And the rich judge takes him home and undresses him and bandages him up. So this is not so subtly homoerotic show. And the older judge bandages him, and he wakes up. He's been unconscious, and he's scared. He says, "What are you doing?" And this is the line that the older judge says, "I'm not doing this because I want to. Stay still," when it's perfectly clear he wants to do it. So this is the next day, or maybe it was when he first. So this is the older judge with the younger prosecutor in bed, and it's just sort of. You go from the skinship is often very heavily laden, even when it's this gentle bandaging thing. It's very near the edge of going into straight out eroticism.
It is sort of partly telling us something about Korean culture, or at the very least, how the Korean government wants Korean culture to be portrayed and viewed, right? That there's something interesting there about, you skirt the censorship regarding sex and really overt eroticism by, these means of just touching, right? And it seems to relate to, just the delay of the kiss, right? So you have these other forms of intimacy that help build up over time to when the characters finally kiss, first comedically, and then last episode magically, or something along those lines.
There's an interesting example, a very recent show. I mean, it just aired a few months ago. It was called The Trunk. And I think they had it on Netflix. It's a shorter show. It may have only 8 episodes. And it's based on a novel that was apparently very popular. But it stars Gong Yoo. And he's one of the very, very top most popular international Korean actors. He's the star of the zombie film Train to Busan, and he's a big figure in the Squid Game. So anyway, he has millions of followers, and literally, I'm not exaggerating. And in The Trunk, it's a very weird story, but the second episode had a very explicit sex scene, and it's not him, it's his ex-wife and her new lover. And I sort of sat up in my chair because it was like full nudity, simulated sex, da da da. And this just provoked great anger among the K-drama multitudes. They said, I don't watch K-dramas for this. Gong Yu, I'm so disappointed in you. And I actually looked it up because I was very surprised that it would have a scene like that. There were two. And I found out it's not a government-funded show. So it was on an independent network that's sort of compared to HBO in the U.S. So that answered the question. And so this might be a new development, and it's going to have a lot of, earthquake level ramifications for the K-drama fan world.
It's interesting, right? It's sort of, as you're describing this, there's very sort of like Waltonian standard features, right, of K-dramas. And so here we have an episode of a series that engages really heavily in contrastandard features of the genre. And it's able to do so precisely because it's through this independent platform.
Right. And so I think people like me, I don't hold Gong Yu to some sort of standard of purity. But I think it's interesting that he chose to be in a show like that because he's been in a lot of the most successful K-dramas, like Goblin. It's like the pinnacle, and he's the big star in it. But I think he's like probably sick of that. If it must be like a K-pop idol being in a K-pop band, they're so restricted. And to try to break out of that role and do something, with more fight to it. And actually, he was in the Squid Game, the season 2, which just aired recently, and he, I hope I'm not giving this away to anybody, but probably if you like Squid Game, you've watched it, he kills himself in a game of Russian roulette. And I think it's partly because the actor just wanted to get out of the Squid Game business. And so, but that's another thing that's pretty shocking, that there's a gun and that he uses the gun and he kills himself with the gun. It's situated in the context of the story in a way that makes it believable and kind of powerful, but even so, he's definitely going against these the standard K-drama elements.
Yeah, and as you were describing, like the K-pop star who wants to get out of it, the K-drama actor who's like feels restricted, it reminds me of like Disney kids, right? So like the Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera's, more recently like the Miley Cyrus's, Adriana Grande, right? Like they, are those Disney like hyper controls their life and hyper controls their image and what they can do and what they can't do. And then once they hit 18, it seems like they just go absolutely wild. And, just like growing up with that or being an artist working within that, I could see how that would be incredibly stifling. And so like, we're going to do something extreme, shocking as a way to like, I feel like with the Disney kids in particular, it's a way of like rebranding, but it seems like something similar could be happening with like the K-drama stars who's like, I feel stifled. I want to try something different, shake out of this rut, basically.
At the same time, I think a lot of them are still in a box as far as things like, if there's gay male K-drama stars, nobody knows about it. They're totally closeted. Gong Yu, case in point. That's my theory. But even dating K-drama actors and actresses can become, just vitriolically attacked by fans for dating someone that they don't approve of or dating at all. And there's been this series of high-level actor suicides. There's been 3 recently, and there was Yi Sung-kyun a year ago, huge actor, a star in Parasite, very tragic. And it's thought it's because of this horrible celebrity culture, and that's high pressure. So you can't really break away and still survive within the, there's one of the actresses who just killed herself was because she'd had a DUI, and the fans wouldn't forgive her, and they kept attacking her, and you can't come back to work. It's really tough.
Yeah, that's messed up, right? I mean, just like celebrity culture, fan culture in general seems hyper problematic and toxic. And it seems like in Korea, it's perhaps even more extreme than it is, say, in the US.
Yes, it is, and that's really too bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think one other theme to talk about, and we have some images associated with this, is the theme of fate, right, in Korean dramas.
This third theme is Inyeon, fate, destiny, and I learned of it through the recent movie Past Lives, a movie written and directed by the Canadian Korean writer-director Celine Song. And it did quite well in the, awards season. Very, very beautifully made film. And it involves two young children who were very close, kind of romantically close, but close. And the young woman's family moved to Canada when she was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9. And she's gone on and led her own life and kind of lost touch with him, become a writer, doing well, lives in New York, has a husband she loves, and he's a Jewish American guy. And then suddenly this man from her past gets in touch and they start to, they Facebook, and then he wants to come and visit. And so it's an extremely poignant story because she feels very drawn to him, connected to him, and yet at the same time, she's really happy in her own life. She truly loves her husband. And by the end of the story, they talk several times, but at the end, they have another conversation about this concept of Inyeon. And Inyeon has to do with the destiny of people in relationships. So it's not just any fate. And she speculates in the dialogue in the movie that it comes from a Buddhist belief in reincarnation. And she says that the view of Inyeon is that if people get married, it means they've sort of been moving toward one another through 8,000 past lives. And even in some of these past lives, they've had accidental encounters with one another, so that, for example, they walked past each other on the street and their clothes touched. And this made so much sense to me because that happens all the time in K-dramas. You see people walk past each other on the street and there's that accidental brush, and then they walk all further along and then they turn around and look at each other, and that's it. That's fate or destiny. And so you can show the next image. This is Queen of Tears. I've mentioned it before. This is the rich Chaebol daughter and the young lawyer that she is in love with and gets married to, but it's difficult. But it turns out over the course of the story, despite all the trauma and travail they go through in their relationship, that they had met as children not once but twice. And in fact, he saved her from drowning when her family was on vacation near where he lived, and he was sort of like a Boy Scout, and he'd learned how to, swim and save drowning people, and so he had saved her, but they'd never been in touch again. They never knew who each other were, but there's these episodes that foretell a destiny. And so another thing that is related to this is the idea of the eternal figures, the immortal figures like the goblin in Goblin or the fox in Nine-Tailed Fox, who are in love with a mortal woman, and they have to find her in subsequent lives. And if there's a death, which I'm afraid to say there might be, the tragedy and the sadness of the death is sort of mitigated by the thought of a new life, finding the person again in a new life. And that's the same as what happens at the end of Past Lives, is the man, as he's leaving to return to Korea, the Korean guy, he turns to the woman, the writer, and says, well, what if in some other life, this is already our past life, something like that. And then he says, who are we then? And so the implication is they've missed the chance at being true lovers in this life, but maybe in the next one. And it's because the ending is so sad, then you have this, oh, well, maybe the other life. And she just looks at him and says, I don't know. And he says, I don't either. And he laughs and gets in the cab and goes. So I'm sorry to give away the ending, but I don't think it ruins it, because I think it makes the story all the more beautiful and fun.
Great. So I think maybe the place to end the conversation is something that you've been returning to time and time again, and we've been returning to, is a question. I reached out to Hannah Kim, who we both know and who I've interviewed here multiple times, once on her work on Korean aesthetics. And I said, I'm going to interview Cynthia about K-dramas. What questions should I ask her? And she wanted to know, and I think this is a fantastic place to end, what have you learned about Korean philosophy, Korean cultural attitudes, perspectives from your immersion for the past several years, all of these K-dramas?
It is a good question. Thank you. I want to, again, give the caveat that I'm not an expert on Korean culture. I've been to Korea once, but, it's a visit. I'm a tourist, and you can't expect to make really valid inferences from TV shows from a culture about the culture. I'd hate for that to be done with American examples. But nevertheless, as depicted in K-dramas, Korean culture has a lengthy heritage of both Confucianism and Buddhism. And from watching the historical dramas, I've learned that actually these were sometimes in conflict. So there was a Goryeo Empire, and I did write down the dates because I don't remember this offhand. The Goryeo Empire, which was quite emphasized Buddhism, 918 to 1392, and it was usurped by the Joseon culture, 1392 to 1897. And one of the first kings of the new culture, the newer culture put much greater emphasis on Confucianism. And so the Buddhism was sort of out, and Confucianism was in, and Confucianism continued to be influential all the way up till the end of the Joseon dynasty, which was 1897 when Japan took over. And in Confucianism, there's a great deal of emphasis on proper rules of conduct and on filial piety, among many other things, of course. From Buddhism, you get the ideas of fate and an afterlife and karma and so on. So King Sejong the Great, who was 18 to 1450, tried to sort of integrate these two into a new system of rules and order, but the Confucian order was more important. So I think you see Confucianism manifested in many practices in the Korean dramas of great filial piety, and in particular, many dramas have the family conducts memorial services for a dead ancestor, usually a father or mother, and they're quite serious. The whole family has to be there. You lay out a certain array of offerings of food and fruits, and they have to be put in a certain design. Now, these can be scenes of enacting family rivalries in many dramas, but nevertheless, everyone's very serious. They dress in nice clothes, they bow, they pray, they light incense. So that's sort of one interesting aspect, and just the respect for the elders. Another way that this shows up is in Buddhist funerals, and there are depictions of Christian funerals too. There is a significant percentage of Koreans who are Christians, but usually when you see a funeral, it's a Buddhist funeral. And this is an example from Stranger, the first show I ever watched. It's a cop and prosecutor show, and one of the young woman prosecutors has been murdered by the murderer they're seeking, or so they think. And so her friends, her prosecutor colleagues go to the funeral. So the funerals are very ritualized, and this shows the scene where the behavior is you wear black and white. The mourners wear their designated clothes. The mourner women will wear the traditional mourning hanbok, maybe white, maybe black. You have this array of white chrysanthemums. Everyone bows twice to the deceased, and then they turn and bow solemnly to the mourners, the family. So here's a few scenes that show that. And this is there's always a funeral portrait, as is illustrated here, of the poor young woman prosecutor. These beautiful arrays of flowers. There's like dozens of these kind of huge wreaths of flowers that are in the hallway outside to show tributes from other friends and family members. This is the father, and then here's the image of the woman. This shows a kind of attitude of great solemnity and respect, and generally the deceased person is cremated, and there's a whole group that goes on a bus to a mausoleum, and they place the urn, and there's pictures. And also there's many scenes in K-dramas where people visit their dead relatives and have long conversations with them. How are you? You know, I've brought you some new flowers. I'm having a real problem in my life now. Can I tell you about it? So I can't just say, oh, you know, so there's a belief in an afterlife, but there's a kind of sense of relationship to the dead that have gone before you that is important to sustain. And I think that's probably not so much from Confucianism as it is from Buddhism.
Yeah, that's super interesting, right? As you're getting into really any aesthetic domain that you're unfamiliar with, right? Yeah. And particularly when it's from another culture, it's not merely that, as you pointed out, you can learn something about the culture by consuming their media, right? That if you were an outsider to the US and watched only American television, you're going to get a very skewed view. But the point here is that, the watching it prompts you to do research, to look at, you notice something and you look online for what's going on here. What is it with the white pallet truck that keeps hitting these people? Or what is it with all the bandages? Or, these funeral services are super interesting. What's going on there? And as you learn about it, that then positively shapes and influences your aesthetic experience of these television shows.
Mm-hmm. I think you're right. I think you put it well. Mm.
Yeah. Awesome. So I think on that note, we'll end the conversation. Cynthia, thank you so much for joining me. This was absolutely terrific. And I look forward now to watching some K-dramas and doing so in a more informed way than I would have prior to this conversation.
I hope you will.